welcome back to the lecture series. So, we are discussing a novel and existence primarily in the light of Heideggerian thoughts, Heideggerian philosophy, Heidegger's concept of the Sein, right? So, we were talking about being in the world, Sein. So, being in the world signifies the unthematic circumspect absorption or being aware in the references that are inherent in the handiness of useful things. So the sane can lose itself in what it encounters within the world or through its familiarity with the world, and thereby it can be numbed by these familiar aspects or dimensions. So the same is always directed and underway. Standing and remaining are only boundary instances of this uh, directed and being underway. So, I mean, the scene is always to mean that it is directed and underway means that it is always to be. Uh, Although it is inert, it is in the process of becoming something, right? Um, Now, in a Heideggerian concept, we also find sign. Sign always indicates, primarily the wherein we live, what our heedfulness is concerned with, and what the relevance is. The peculiar uh, character of useful things as signs becomes especially manifest or clear in this process of establishing of a sign. So signs are not things which merely stand in an indicating relationship to other things, but explicitly make us aware of a totality of useful things, uh, such that the worldly character of what is at hand manifests itself. Signs address themselves to a specifically spatial being in the world. So, Milan Kundera, in The Art of the Novel, says, and I quote him at length: since Balzac, the world of our being has a historical nature, and characters' lives unfold in a realm of time marked by dates. But two things should not be confused. There is, on the one hand, the novel that examines the historical dimension of human existence, and on the other, the novel that is the illustration of a historical situation, the description of a society at a given moment, a novelized historiography, popularizations that translate non novelistic knowledge into the language of the novel. Well, I'll never tire of repeating the novel's sole rise on the tray is to say what only the novel can say, unquote. So, in a novel, history can be present in two ways. One is how individual character speaks to history and is shaped by history, and second is illustration of a historical situation, in other words, description of a society at a given moment, which leads to a novelized historiography. In Milan Kundera's works, history is not a bare description. He makes a minimal interface with history per se, rather than directly elaborating a political party, let's say, or an organization, a social institution. Uh, in other words, rather than elaborating history itself, Kundera is rather interested in the history of man embedded in the history of the society. So, novelists' work is to write the alternate history that the historiographer forgets to mention. And here we are thinking of so many writings, right? Khalid Hosseini comes to mind. Khalid Hosseini's Kite Runner, A Thousand Splendid Suns. Uh, we have so many other authors who bring in this backdrop of real happenings. Khalid Hosseini is talking about Afghanistan and the wars in Afghanistan, US invasion, Russian invasion of Afghanistan, and his story is his characters are pitted against this historical background, these chapters in history that actually happened. So, for Milan Kundera, just like the self, history is an existential situation and creates existential situation for the characters in the novel. So, history has a major role in shaping the collective psyche of a given generation that is born in a given socio-political historical juncture. Think of the novels, the artworks written against the backdrop of partition. uh, Bapsi Sidhwa's Cracking India, for example, Amrita Pritam's writings, so Khushwant Singh's A Train to Pakistan. So many of these artworks come to mind. So, novel's task is not to study just the dry reality or the events that are depicted in history, but to explore possibilities of existence. So, to read a novel, one need not have to know its historical backbone. A successful novel intersperses history with life in such a way as to tell readers whatever needs to be known and told about history. However, not through history directly, but through personal storytelling uh, perspectives. Now, Kundera says something very interesting. He says here that if God is gone in the modern world, in the postmodern world, if we do not see the God, and if man is no longer the master of his own being and he is subsumed by external determinants, one of such determinants being uh, history, then who is the master? So, drawing from this discussion, Kundera goes on to say that the planet is currently passing through a phase where there are no masters, and that's why there is a lightness, a lack of anchorage, which is nonetheless unbearable. So, Milan Kundera looks at history's encounter with novel in terms of reincarnations. He's using the word reincarnation, where same characters seem to keep coming back. History is traversed by the same characters endlessly reincarnated. This points to the question of a novel being a genre that is constantly growing, developing, metamorphosing through dialogue, reception, and influence. And then the second fact being that history and zeitgeist or world spirit, which is an idealistic pattern that influences ethical, political, philosophical, and cultural understandings, this history and zeitgeist moving in time not in a unilinear fashion but in a circular pattern, in a circular manner. As modern beings with a historical dimension, we tend to confuse and conflate reality, real incidents into symbols in our minds. So, creating such symbols of sameness aids survival in the manner that we like. For example, we are attracted to any ideas that are rich with rhetorical meanings and that produce um, symbols. Symbols such as Nazism, fascism, colonialism, and they almost have a poetic value, and they create an aura in the minds of the people. So, symbols, like Kundera would very correctly note, uh, can be responsible, uh, could have a very, destructive dimension and intention, and could be responsible for the setup of the most despotic forms of government. So he says that there could be a lot of occurrences going on around us that uh, do not appear as symbols, that our minds, our collective psyche, collective understanding uh, does not grasp in the form of symbols. So, lone cases of death, they appear hackneyed, too trite, and they do not pay service to the rhetoric and the poesy. So they do not register in the same way. That's why we do not discuss so many things. He's giving us examples. Let's say the indigenous people regularly dying. We don't talk about it because they don't have the symbolic power, right? Symbolic voltage is the word that Kundera would use. The Afghans dying every day in the same manner as people died in 9/11, for example. However, 9/11 is blown out of proportion. It becomes the worst form of massacre in the recent history, right? Because we see the subjects that die, that suffer here are Americans, right? So, the subjects that die in 9/11 are symbols of modernity, freedom, and adventure. So, so people grasp it immediately. Other deaths are not as terrible as the deaths caused uh, on 9/11. Not as much is at stake as the destruction of the Pentagon, for example. Not as much is put at stake when we bomb Afghanistan or when we massacre the indigenous people. Not much, as much is at stake as when Pentagon is destroyed. So we as social beings are taught to react in a very pre-programmed manner to the to what Kundera calls as a symbolic voltage uh, that we have been made to understand as darker and more repellent. Some incidents, some chapters in history are automatically registered in our mind as more repellent. Uh, our selective and differential treatment of histories come to the fore. This irrational system of symbol is also responsible, like I was saying a while back, for the formation of governments through creation of absolute good and absolute evil. So the values that we kind of invest towards these symbols, in these symbols, the masses most of the times cannot distinguish uh, between good and evil. It's very hard, difficult to distinguish in reality. Most of the times they are intermingled, they are present together. So masses passionately tend to follow values that are instilled in them without understanding their meanings, and so um, symbol, you know, associating institutions with symbols could lead to the formation of the most tyrannical form of government. Now, coming to another term, polyhistoricism. In novel, polyhistoricism means digression from the existential question about self through making a number of outward ventures to history, to geography, painting, architecture, and so on. According to Milan Kundera, polyhistoricism makes the novel lack its specificity. Now, to counter this statement by Kundera, we have a thinker like Herman Brock. According to Brock, polyhistorical approach, when applied to the novel, is not really a digression to the historical, geological, scientific inquiry, but all these intellectual dimensions can be deployed towards enhancing what is at the root of the novel's investigation as a genre, which is seeking the self, or the question of existence. So, polyhistoricism might bring in, you know, dimensions of that are extra literary, that are outside of literature. They could be history or geography or painting, like we already noted, but they are not happening inside the novel as decoupled from the moot question. They are integrated to the moot question of self and existence. In fact, they amplify that question, right? So, Brock's ideas of modernism evolved from his immediate societal experience in Nazi Germany, but it did not grow and flourish in its natural environment and among immediate readership. He was read and praised by a community of readers and connoisseurs who have experienced a completely different version of modernism. For example, while the established American school insists destroying traditional novel, uh, traditional novel form, and thereby drawing a boundary between traditional and modern novels. So, for example, while the established American school insists on destroying the traditional novel form and drawing a boundary line between traditional and modern novels, thereby focusing on the fragmented identity of the author and the lack of totality in the modern novel. Brock would say that there is no such thing as a traditional novel. This is because the genre's possibilities are far from exhausted. Novel and traditional always sound as oxymoron. Novel can never be traditional. What is bygone could make a comeback in the modern avatar, right? So rather than fragmented or whole, the the author as well as his work are layered and unpredictable on surface. So, according to Herman Brock, novels quest continues and will continue through all ages. Brock was possessed by the uh, passion for the new form. So he was a modernist in orientation. We see that establishment modernism would have the novel do away with the artifice of character, which it claims is finally nothing but a mask that is pointlessly hiding the author's face. Uh, Now, Brock says that author's self is undetectable. So, what is the face? What is the mask? What is being hidden? Is what comprises artifice of character cannot be pinpointed as such. The author's self is, you know, uh, undetectable. So, establishment modernism has proscribed the notion of totality. They focus on fragmentation. Uh, the very word that Brock, on the other hand, uses readily in order to say that in the age of the excessive division of labor, or uh, in the age of runaway specialization, novel could be treated as one of the last outposts where man, or rather human, can still maintain connections with life in all its entirety, right? So, novel unlike what establishment modernism says, that novel is, uh, fragmentation. Modern novel is all about fragmentation. Um, you know, Brock would say that novel is the only place where life in its entirety uh, is visible. In all other places, life is in shambles. Life is available as, broken shards and pieces. So according to establishment modernism, an impregnable boundary separates the modern novel from the traditional novel. They're trying to draw this distinct demarcation. In Brock's view, the modern novel continues the same quest that has been preoccupying all the great novelists since Cervantes's times. Now, Brock rejects the aesthetic of the psychological novel in favor of the novel that he calls as uh, nociological. So instead of psychological, he would use so instead of psychological, he would use the term nociological or polyhistorical. So we also have Brock's compatriot Adalbert Stifter, who is considered as the founding father of Austrian fiction, and he created a polyhistorical novel in the precise sense of the term in year 1857. So the novel has an extraordinary power of incorporation, whereas neither poetry nor philosophy can incorporate the novel. The other way around is not possible. The novel can incorporate both poetry and philosophy without, losing any of its identity, uh, which is characterized precisely by its tendency to embrace other genres. Novel embraces other genres and novelizes them. The other way around is not possible. So, novel can absorb philosophical and scientific knowledge and still metamorphose, but remain the novel as such. Still remain the novel all the same. So, in Brock's perspective, the word polyhistorical means marshalling all intellectual means and all poetic forms to illuminate what the novel alone can uh, discover. So, we are bringing in poetry, philosophy, history, uh, architecture, film, letters, everything into the novel. But the query at the heart remains the same, which is to discover man's being. So, Die Schlafwandler was written by Brock between 1928 and 1931, and it comprises three books. Each book is set in a different historical period, in 1888, 1903, and 1918, respectively, and each book presents a different story. Characters from the first two books run over into the third, uh, and yet there is a unity. It is not that the novel is devoid of alternatives. In fact, we see that Daischlaf Wandler is a perfect example of the interpretive possibilities that arise from what contemporary literary theorists would call as the turn to narrative, right? Die Schlafwandler is symptomatic of the turn to narrative. Brock uses arguments in order to distinguish between art and kitsch. Uh, According to Brock, uh, what is kitsch? Kitsch is an attempt to hide the lack of a central value through aesthetic decoration. He calls his act he calls it as mash or decoration bombast, bombastic decoration that is hollow within somewhere. So however, Brock also points out to what he saw as the wider consequences of a total reduction of style to function. Uh, and in a way, he also confesses or understands that uh, kitsch, after a point, is unavoidable. To a lesser or greater extent, it does come in writing, in art making. So, notes that an ornament could be decorative and merely fulfill an aesthetic function. Uh, However, it is also indicative of the style of a period in art history. And in this sense, when seen in this way, an ornament is not merely a decoration. It completes a work of art and expresses the essence of its history on a minor or smaller scale. Brock is interested in what the novel alone can discover, which something that cannot be approached or uh, explained by history or any other field. But he knows uh, that the conventional form of novel, comprising, a character's adventure and a mere narration of that adventure, is very limited. Novel's traditional avatar is limited, and it could also reduce the cognitive capacities. So, the polyhistorical purpose demands a technique of ellipsis which Brock has not completely worked out, uh, and architectural clarity suffers for it. We talk about, architectonics that inform an organic wholeness in an artwork, where the various parts are not only floating and superficially attached to one another, but they are fused into one another. Um, in the elliptical technique, the several elements, including verse, narrative, aphorism, reportage, essay, all these remain more juxtaposed than blended into a true polyphonic unity. So, what Brock aims for but misses is the architectural clarity. So, the unachieved in his work can show us the need for several things. One is a, a new art of radical divestment, right? This technique of ellipsis, which can encompass the complexity of existence in the modern world without losing architectonic clarity. And second is a new art of novelistic counterpoint, which can blend philosophy, narrative, and dream into one. And it could actually, it could acquire, it could have some form of musical quality. Third is a new art of the specifically novelistic essay, which does not claim to bear an apodictic message, but remains hypothetical, playful, and even ironic. So, if literary history is to be rejuvenated, the prejudices of historical objectivism must be uh, removed, must be done away with, and the traditional approach to literature must be replaced by an aesthetics of reception and impact. The historical relevance of literature is not based on an organization of literary works which is established post factum, but on the reader's past experience of the literary data. This relationship creates a dialogue that is the first condition for a literary history. Literary historian must first become a reader again himself before he can understand and classify a work. In other words, before the literary historian can justify his own evaluation in the light of his present position in the historical progression of readers. Now, R.G. Collingwood's criticism of the prevailing ideology of objectivity in history, to quote Collingwood here, history is nothing but the reenactment of past thought in the historian's mind, unquote, is is valid for literary history. For the positivistic view of history, events in an isolated past neglect the artistic quality as well as specific historical relevance, and they offer the same face to each reader in each period, right? So when we don't have a historical when we don't have an artistic uh, quality and historical relevance embedded into the historical events, they would offer the same face to all the readers across all periods. A literary work must be understood as creating a dialogue, and philological scholarship has to be founded on a continuous rereading of texts, not only based on mere facts. Philological scholarship is continuously dependent upon interpretation, which aims at reflection upon as well as impulse to grasp new understandings along with learning about the object. So, history of literature is a process of aesthetic reception and production which takes into cognizance, or which takes place in realization of literary texts, happening, performing on the part of the receptive reader, the reflective critic, and the author, all working in tandem, all working in a continued flow of creativity. The continuously growing literary data which appear in the conventional literary histories are mere leftover from this process of uh, creative continuity if we may call it so. So they are only literary data are only uh, the residual aspects. They are the collected and classified past, and therefore not history at all. They could be literary data could be seen as pseudo history. Anyone who considers such literary data as equal to history, anyone that equates literary data with history, confuses the eventful character of a work of art with that of historical matter of factness. The historical context in which a literary work appears is factual, independent series of events that exists apart from the reader. So, in contrast to a political event or chapter, a literary event has no lasting results that succeed, that succeeding generations uh, cannot avoid. So, to put this simply, literary event cannot last regardless of the recipient, the audience from a particular period. History can. A political event can exist because it's based on matter of factness. It can exist regardless of whether we like it, we ignore it. It will continue to exist as a concrete past. Uh, so, literary event can continue to have an effect only if future generations still respond to it or rediscover it. So, if there are readers who take up the work of the past again, that's how literary past can be resumed in the present. Or, if there is a need, a desire by the current generation to imitate, outdo, or refute a work, when uh, contemporary authors are engaging with a literary past in that way, only then can literary past survive in the succeeding generations. So, the question of the connectedness of the Zain is the ontological problem of its occurrence. To expose the structure of occurrence and the existential and temporal conditions of its possibility means to gain an ontological understanding of historicity. The scientific and theoretical kind of treatment of the problem of history does not only aim at uh, epistemological clarification of historiographical comprehension or logic of the concept formation of historiographical presentation. Rather, it is oriented towards the objective side. So, in this line of questioning, history is accessible only as an object of science. I would like to stop our lecture here today and let's meet in another lecture with another round of discussions. Thank you.